again, and thank you, Maritime Standard. My name is Christos Papanicolaou. I am the Senior Vice President of SSY, which is a global brokerage firm in 27 offices globally with 450 people. And currently we're going to give you a crude and product overview in a concise macro version, so as we said, we could move on with the afternoon festivities. So the first time we're going to take a look at is the crude sector and what's going on there. There's four sections we'll always look at: is the oil supply and demand, and we've seen what's going on with OPEC cuts. We've seen the Atlantic supply really grow dramatically this year. China's pace of crude imports has grown in the first half of 23, and we'll talk about that a bit later. India, overall oil demand and refinery growth is going, increasing dramatically as well. And historical low oil stocks, because of the price volatility we've seen, is one thing that's there. The regulatory side, we've talked about this immensely today. EEXI, ballast water treatments, which are a CapEx item, and the EU ETS, which is a taxation item, all go into kind of, let's say, the regulatory side. Then we look at the fleet growth. Fleet growth kind of right now is at a very low basis going forward, and we'll touch on some numbers there. And we see a growing demand globally for eco vessels, partly because of the taxation on it through the EU ETS, partly because of the long-term benefits of it, as well as the kind of global benefits on the eco side. Scrubber fitting, that's another CapEx item, and inefficiency of the older vessels go into the fleets. The last one on the sanctions is a sensitive topic in the sense that, who is trading sanctions, who's not trading sanctions. Bottom line, once the euro rose above $60, we saw sanction trading going off the G7 EU vessels and going more into, again, the shadow fleet, and we'll give you some numbers there a bit later. When looking at the product tanker market, it's similar but different. On the product tanker markets, which are all your products derived from crude, we're seeing, again, low stocks and inventories. Pricing has a lot to do with that. But we've also seen closures since 2020. That's creating some imbalances and demand for the midstream, which is the shipping side of things on the product side. We're seeing new refineries in the Middle East, Nigeria, Mexico being two of the large ones, and China's teapot refineries and their product quotas have kind of put some limitations on the oil supply side. Same regulatory side falls into the product side. Although the fleet size is growing a bit, but we're going to talk a little bit later and show you some numbers. The fleet size is growing in both the LR1, LR2 sides, which are the larger ships, but at the same time what we're seeing is an aging profile, which is going to affect the overall tradability. Sanctions also is a factor in product tankers, but the bigger thing here is it's hard to cap the sanctions on diesel and various products because there's a different number parameter versus the $60 euros price cap that's there. Since it seems to be the steam, we're going to take a quick look at the crude market and why we talk about the numbers we talk about. We haven't seen this type of low growth in tankers in a long time. When we look at the forward book, and I'll give you exact numbers later, you could just look at the graph in the upper left-hand corner where we see our the fleet order book is diminishing as we go into 24 into 26, partly because discussions on propulsion, partly because the cost of the vessels rising, and secondly because demand destruction during COVID years led to a lack of orders. In addition, as we go over to the right on the age profile, you can see the fleet's aging. On the Aframaxes and the Suezmax and the VLCCs, you have a large number of vessels still trading in the 15 to 19 and 20 plus year old. And if you look back just a couple years, we were scrapping vessels at less than 20 years old. Crude tanker removals, you can see, is diminished. I can't tell you if that will improve. Some people here believe it will improve. We have not seen any evidence of scrapping, and we have seen more people trade, especially in the older MRs, to 25 years old, which is a little disconcerting. But the more important thing is if you look at the asset values, someone here earlier spoke about the historic numbers in 2008. We're very rapidly approaching that. The difference is we only have a year of good market behind us, which means, tells us at least, that this price target is here to stay for the coming future. On the product tanker fleet, as we said earlier, the numbers are a little different. As you see into 23, 24, and into 26, there is a fair number of vessels that have been ordered that are delivering. But at the same time, if you look at the age profile as discussed, and you look at the MR sector particularly, you have a much larger number in that 20 years old plus and 15 to 19-year-old age segment, which is affecting the tradability of them in the broader markets. We believe that we've created almost a two-tier market on that. And the LR2s are an interesting animal because they're essentially an Aframax and a LR2, which is the clean side. With the Aframax market being where it is, we've seen a lot of LR2s go over to the dirty side. Again, we've seen removals though on the MRs particularly, because as we discussed earlier, we were looking at the numbers and we're seeing a lot of older MRs kind of like still trading, and they're starting to move out. Again, on asset prices, same number. It's approaching 2008 with a shorter runway on where the market's been. I'm going to go real quickly on this one because there's controversy at times with shadow markets. But bottom line, if you look at the lower right-hand corner, 16% of the overall crude tanker fleet is trading in what's derived the shadow market. That definition is essentially who's trading into sanctioned trades, which is Venezuela, Iran, and Russia currently, and where the ownership lies in those ships. Someone indicated earlier that these ships are never coming back. We haven't seen them come back. We're not sure they can't come back. The regulatory side of that is something that we're not going to kind of try to predict. Again, we talked about the average tanker age of scrapping, and what we're seeing here is 23 has shown no scrapping for any of the crude sector. The ships might have sold into different sectors, might have moved into various, again, shadow fleet components or tier 2 trading components. And we're seeing the average age kind of increase into where it's scrapping. Unlike the MRs, again, on the bottom right, where we have seen a fair number of MR scrapping this year, particularly because of age limit, aging out, as we say. Once they become beyond 22 years old and they have the 4th intermediate survey, it becomes very costly, and we've seen ships decide not to go through that. Again, crude tanker net fleet change, we're not going to touch on this except to go look at the lower right and touch upon one important factor. We have 1.5% total crude fleet increase over the next 2 years. That's big, because as the ships age and we look into the regulatory side of things and ships slowing down, we know that 1.5 is a net fleet actually adjustment downward when you talk about the tradability of them, because as we indicated earlier, we have so many ships that we're trading in the older age that at some point they're not in the, call it, global market that we all trade within. Product tanker is a little bit different, but not too dissimilar. It shows a total fleet growth of about 1.8% on the total fleet, looking at it between the various sectors from now till 24. It's not enough of a significant growth to worry about. I know some people are concerned about the amount of ships ordered, but when you look at the aging of the fleet and you look at the kind of components on the LR2s particularly, as we discussed, those ships are particularly interesting because they're a clean ship as well as a dirty ship. Regulatories, again, we've talked so much about this. I'm pretty much going to skip over this, except to say they affect the tradability of the ships. The IMO, EEXIs, and CIIs, we've talked about how they're going to trade it, but more importantly, the ETS is one component that we're seeing that has a monetary effect. The ETS is essentially the emission trading system, and as you can see on the lower point, TD20, which is a Suezmax trade, the net profitability of a ship that's efficient, the new building on the left-hand side, has a much higher time charter equivalent, TCE, than the older ships, the 15-year-olds, which forces charters to ignore the older ships and go for the newer ships. This is why we're seeing a lot of demand on efficiency here. Alternative fuel order book, again, we've talked about this so much. The large amount of gas-fueled ships, we believe gas LNG is a kind of the segue gas that we're going to see. We know about methanol and ammonia California, but we just don't see the infrastructure being built around them for bunkers, so we don't believe that will be the next gateway. It'll be more LNG in the near future. And again, we've talked about all the various outlooks here, and happy to talk to you about any particular on a micro basis, so we can move on. Thank you.